This question comes from Matt, and his question is, I grossed $215,000 last year. What should my net profit be? So, like so many questions, there's no easy answer. So, first I've got to ask, what does net profit mean to you? Because it means a totally different thing to a whole lot of different people. Usually, a smaller business, maybe a less mature company, a lot of times business owners might think of this number as their salary plus any money that's left over. That's net profit. That's how most people think about net profit, is the money that was left over that they got to take plus the money that they took through the year as the owner. That's not what net profit is. And so that's why I have to clarify this first to describe net profit. Net profit is after you pay yourself a salary, and I'm going to add the word reasonable to that, and I'll explain. Whatever is left over after all expenses plus paying you as the owner, or if you have partners, paying each of you as owners, that is net profit. Net profit is left over after you place yourself. So as an example, if down the road you go to sell your company, let's say you do $1 million a year, and you make a $100,000 a year salary, and at the end of the year, $100,000 is left over, that's a 10% profit. That $100,000 that you pay yourself does not get added into your profit. The company buying you will not give you credit for the $100,000 that you're paying yourself, that because you're leaving the company, it was bought out, that you're no longer going to be making, because they have to replace you. You were the guy running the company. You were the guy doing a lot of work, so now they've got to hire somebody to replace you. They need that $100,000 to pay that person. So the only thing you get to count in your valuation of your company is the $100,000 or 10% profit left over. Your paycheck does not count. Now, if at the end of the year, if when you sell your company is doing $1 million a year in gross, you're paying yourself $210 a year, and there's $100,000 left over. Now, $210 a year to run $1 million company is a bit on the high side. It's not going to cost $210 to replace you. Maybe it costs $90 to replace you. It costs some number. Maybe it costs $70. Maybe it costs $120. But there's some number it's going to cost to replace you, and so some portion of that $210 you're paying yourself could be backed out and applied to profit because you were just paying yourself too much, in a sense, more than a reasonable salary to replace you, and therefore you can count some amount of that money that you were paying yourself towards profit. Again, whatever that number is plus your plus your true net profit, what was left over after you pay yourself, gets added together, and that becomes your net profit. So when you're talking about net profit, you're going to see profits in this business everywhere from 5% to in the 20s. Not many are doing in the 20s. When you look at the surveys, I'm about to give you my theory here, it could be totally flawed, but when you look at surveys in magazines like Lawn and Landscape, and guys will say, our average net profit is 17% or 25%. The dilemma is you've also got to know how big they are, and when they do those surveys, people do not understand what real net profit is. And so if you take a $30,000 a year salary all year long, and it would cost $70 to hire somebody, that extra $40 that was profit in the year is not really profit. It just got stuck in profit on your P&L, but that's not really profit if you go to sell your company. So when you're looking at these studies, these profit numbers are generally wrong because people do not all evaluate and state profit exactly the same way. So I find it difficult to look at that stuff. So now that I've explained what profit is, you're going to see numbers in the 5 to 20-something% range, even when profit is done right. But again, then you've got to look at where is the business in its life cycle. So as an example, if you're a younger company, maybe, and depending on how aggressive you are and how aggressive you remain as the company matures, your profits might be lower as you invest a lot of your essentially profit back into the company. And so you might only have a 7% profit this year, but had you not made so many investments in marketing and growth and hiring people in advance to prepare them for all the growth, maybe your margins, your profits would have been 17%. And so this stuff can be very skewed based on how fast you're growing. In my case, we've always grown at 100% debt-free business. So, and it gets harder and harder to do the bigger you get. And so I was in a very fast growth phase. I was also paying cash for, meaning us as a company, we were paying cash for everything as we went. And we were also buying huge amounts of things in advance so we would buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of chemical, things like that. So in advance so that we could save money. That costs a tremendous amount of money. And when you run your P&L statement, that really hurts your P&L and hurts your profit margins. So our profit margins for many, many years were very suppressed because we were taking essentially profit and reinvesting it in the company to have no debt and to grow very quickly. And we've been in that phase. We've stayed in that phase for years and years. And so if I were to tell you my net profit, in some cases it was lower than what it really was because I was taking so much profit and reinvesting it. So when you're also asking other people, what's your net profit? Well, that's going to be all over the board based on their strategy. A lot of guys will say, oh, I have a 20% net profit, but they're also accumulating $150,000 a year in debt. Well, that's okay. So yeah, you had that profit this year, but your debt's growing. When you go to sell your company, they take the debt off the top. So if you go and sell your company and they give you $1 million valuation and you have $400,000 in debt, you get $600,000. You don't get $1 million. And they pay off your debt. So debt counts against profit. So I'm throwing out all these things to consider in net profit. And I also gave you a range. So I can't really tell you what that number is going to be. My personal belief for me is that my profits are higher in residential than they are in commercial because of significant route density. But a lot of guys you talk to would say, you're insane to be in the residential space. There's no money in that. And I agree. The smaller guys that are all spread out, the residential business is no good. It's and the money is all in density and building a little bit bigger residential business. In commercial, you can have fewer accounts because you stay on those properties for much longer, and they tend to work out. So, and also, so there's all these factors to take into account. So I hope that was helpful. That's a way to think about profits. I threw out some examples of profit ranges, but without knowing more about how much you pay yourself and all that kind of stuff, there's no real way I can give you that number. But at 215 in gross, I would think you're in a growth phase. So I would imagine that you're trying to pay yourself out of that 215. So I would expect your net profit margin to be very low, extremely low, because you're taking a salary and because you're reinvesting in the company. And I would expect your net profit to be low for years to come while you're growing up to that $1 million number. And I wouldn't be bothered by that at all. As long as you're not going into tremendous debt to make a big profit, because that's not really profit. As long as you're not doing that, if you're using the money to reinvest in the company to grow faster, who cares if you have a low net profit margin? But make sure you're pricing the work at that when your company stabilizes and you're not aggressively investing in growth, that there's a lot of profit left. And for me, I would want my profit margins to be well over 10%. I would like to see them closer to 20, but that's very unrealistic for a lot of businesses, the way they're built and based on the clients they're servicing and their service offering. So for me, it's a 20% number that I would be going after. And but again, it's been very strategic about the kind of business that I've wanted to be part of and built. And if you aren't doing something similar at the same scale, because scale means density, then that could be a hard number to achieve. And I also believe 20% for the right kind of business you can do better than even that. But again, I keep going on and on here, but I keep thinking of other points. You can't run a $500,000 a year business, take a $100,000 a year paycheck, and expect to make 20% profits, because that is essentially taking 40% of the money off the table on a $500,000 business. There's no way. It's not sustainable for the long term. Maybe it's sustainable in a year because you ran up a little debt, you didn't reinvest any money in the business, your equipment trucks were all paid for. Maybe in the short term, a number like that could be quoted, but in the long term, no way. That kind of business never holds up. So you have to be doing a certain amount of money so you can pay yourself and still have a significant amount of money left over. And at 215, there's only so much that you could possibly have left over after you pay yourself enough money to live. So if you have any other questions on that, let me know. Thanks.